My grandfather left his $30 million empire to a stranger. Then I discovered she was family when my grandfather died. Everyone in my family expected my older brother to inherit his company. Nobody questioned it. He was the oldest grandson. He had worked in the company for almost 10 years. He attended every board meeting. He knew every executive. He even had an office next to my grandfather's. I had never wanted any of it. I worked as a school counselor and lived in a small apartment. My brother used to joke that I was the only person in the family who didn't understand how valuable our last name was. Then the lawyer read the will, and everything changed. We were sitting in my grandfather's study. My father sat beside my brother. My aunt and uncle were across from us. I was near the window. The lawyer opened a thick folder. My client has divided his estate into several portions. Everyone leaned forward. The mansion went to my father. Several properties went to my uncle. Investment accounts were divided between various relatives. Then came the company. My grandfather's construction empire was worth approximately $30 million. My brother smiled. The lawyer looked directly at him. The controlling shares will not go to you. My brother's smile disappeared. Who gets them? The lawyer turned a page. A woman named Alina Morris. Nobody knew who she was. My father stood up. Who? The lawyer repeated the name. Alina Morris. My brother laughed. This has to be a mistake. The lawyer shook his head. It isn't. My father demanded to know who she was. The lawyer said she was a private citizen who lived several hours away. She had never attended a family event. She had never worked for the company. As far as we knew, she'd never met my grandfather. My brother exploded. Then why would Grandpa leave her everything? The lawyer didn't answer. Instead, he handed each of us an envelope. Mine contained a photograph. I stared at it. It showed my grandfather standing beside a young woman. She was holding a baby. On the back of the photograph was a date from 34 years earlier, and 3 words, "The truth starts here." I immediately called my father. He wouldn't answer. I called again. Nothing. Then my mother called me. Her voice was shaking. "Where did you get that photograph?" The lawyer gave it to me. Silence. Then she said, "Don't ask your father about it." That was the moment I knew something was terribly wrong. The next morning, I drove to see Alina. I didn't tell my family. I found her living in a modest house. She opened the door. The second she saw the photograph in my hand, she knew why I was there. "You know, I didn't understand." "Know what?" She stepped aside. "Come in." On her living room wall was another photograph, my grandfather, standing beside the same young woman from my picture. But there was something different. The woman was pregnant. I stared at Alina. "Who is that?" "My mother." My heart started racing. "Who was your father?" She looked at me. "Your grandfather." I couldn't speak. Alina explained everything. 34 years earlier, my grandfather had been married to my grandmother, but he had a secret relationship with Alina's mother. When she became pregnant, he wanted to leave his marriage. My grandmother discovered the affair. There was a massive argument. Then Alina's mother disappeared. My grandfather believed she had left voluntarily, but she hadn't. According to Alina, my grandmother had paid her to leave. She threatened to destroy her financially if she stayed. Alina grew up believing her biological father wanted nothing to do with her. But years later, she discovered letters from my grandfather. He had been searching for her. He eventually found her. They began secretly meeting. That's how their relationship had continued for years without the family knowing. My grandfather never told us, but Alina had become extremely important to him. Then she showed me another document, a DNA test. There was no doubt. She was his daughter, my aunt, my father's sister, and nobody in our family had known, except my father. I stared at her. "How?" She looked down. "He found out 3 years ago." I suddenly understood why my father wouldn't answer my calls. He had known, and he had kept it secret. When I returned home, my father was waiting. He looked exhausted. "Where did you go?" "To meet Alina." His face changed. "You shouldn't have done that. She's your sister." He sat down. "I know." I couldn't believe it. "You knew for 3 years." He nodded. "Grandpa told me." "Why didn't you tell anyone?" My father looked toward the floor. "Because I was afraid." "Of what?" "Of losing everything." He explained that my grandfather had told him Alina would eventually inherit the company. Not because she was his favorite, because she was the only person he believed could protect it. My father had begged him to reconsider. He didn't. My grandfather believed the family had become obsessed with money. My brother had been particularly aggressive. He had already been pressuring executives to give him control. Then my grandfather discovered something. My brother had been moving company money into private accounts. Not millions, but enough to worry him. My father knew. He had covered it up. That's why Grandpa had stopped trusting him. The entire will was a trap. The mansion, the properties, the investments, those were distractions. The real inheritance was the company, and Grandpa had deliberately placed it outside the immediate family. Then my brother found out. He came to my apartment furious. "You went to see her?" I didn't answer. He slammed his hand on the table. "Do you understand what she is doing? She's inheriting what Grandpa wanted her to have. She's stealing our company." "No." I looked him in the eyes. "Grandpa gave it to her." He laughed bitterly. "You actually believe this?" Then he said something that made me realize how much worse things were. "She doesn't know what Grandpa found." "What did he find?" find? My brother stopped talking. I stared at him. What did he find? He left. That night I called Alina. She told me to come over. She had found a locked box among her mother's belongings. Inside were documents, bank records, company contract, emails. My brother had been involved in a much larger scheme than we'd realized. He had been working with several executives to move company assets into shell companies. My father knew. My uncle suspected. My grandfather had been collecting evidence. The reason he left the company to Alina was simple. She was the only major beneficiary who wasn't involved. She had no business ties, no debt, no loyalty to the executives, and most importantly, she didn't know enough about the company's internal politics to be manipulated. The lawyer had been instructed to give her control, but only after the evidence was secured. The investigation lasted months. My brother eventually confessed to financial fraud. My father resigned from the company. Several executives were fired. My uncle disappeared from the business completely. Alina became the controlling shareholder, but she didn't become the person everyone expected. She didn't buy a mansion. She didn't fire everyone. She didn't suddenly start behaving like a billionaire. Instead, she hired independent auditors. She rebuilt the company's leadership, and she offered me a position on the board. I almost refused. Then she said, "I don't want people around me who want the money. I want people who wanted nothing to do with it." I accepted. A year later, the company was stronger than it had been in decades. My father eventually apologized to Alina. She didn't forgive him immediately, but over time, they began talking. My brother received a prison sentence, and the family mansion was eventually sold. The irony was almost perfect. The people who had spent their entire lives believing they were entitled to the family fortune ended up losing the very thing they had fought over. The woman nobody knew existed became the person who saved it. And I learned something from my grandfather's final decision. Sometimes an inheritance isn't about rewarding the people who were closest to you. Sometimes it's about finding the one person who can keep everything from falling apart. Like and subscribe for more videos like these. Thanks for watching.